Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It's that car again. That car is the black SUV that's been parked outside our house for the third night. Adriana looked around, trying to make sure her husband understood her. But Michael continued to stare absent-mindedly, as if trying to translate her words from a language he didn't understand. Didn't he notice? After looking, the wife continued. Next to my Chevrolet is always parked and stands until 11 p.m. And no one goes out. At least I haven't seen anyone. I don't know what Michael was thinking, and he was saddened that Adriana had called the Chevy hers. But it's his car. He just hadn't gotten behind the wheel in a long time. And that's why they re-registered the vehicle 6 months ago to his wife. Nobody needs your car. After a pause, he added, "Don't worry. Ethan and I will leave again today about something incomprehensible." Adriana spoke up, but this time she didn't turn around. "I've wanted to talk to you about this for a long time, but I haven't gotten around to it. I'm sorry for not being prepared." Ethan was the name of their 6-year-old son, who was due to start school in September. It was barely June yet. There was a whole summer ahead of them. That depends. Michael hardly had a whole summer ahead of him. Doctors said that if he didn't get a bone marrow transplant in the next 2 months, a spot in the cemetery or a box in a newly built columbarium could be ready by fall. Leukemia. More specifically, aplastic anemia. The prescribed medications were already barely keeping the disease in check. Aggressive intervention was required, but there was no suitable donor. We could have gone to an international donor base, but that would have cost a lot more. What difference does it make? The cost of Michael's operation was not worth $2 million anyway. That's a fantastic sum for him. And to wait for the quota. There's no time left. The correct diagnosis came too late. First, Michael thought it was COVID, then a cold, then fatigue from endless acute respiratory infections, and acute respiratory infections. His bones ached and his nose began to bleed frequently. It was only then that he ventured into the overhaul. Too late. His train was already hurtling toward the abyss. He and Adriana even tried to figure out what they could sell to raise the money they needed. For example, the Chevy that the mysterious villains were supposedly targeting. $300,000 at best isn't even enough to search an international database, plus preliminary procedures, tests, consultations. And there's nothing else to sell. Not an apartment after all. Then they couldn't come up with anything. They waved goodbye. Or rather, Michael did. And Adriana did not object to it. So Michael took the conversation started by his wife quite calmly. Sooner or later, he expected to hear something like that from her. "I don't want Ethan to see you like this. He's too impressionable. I hope you understand me correctly. It wasn't about the son, of course." Michael certainly didn't want to die in front of him either. He didn't want him to remember his father looking so doomed at objects that had lost all meaning and were fading away. Day by day, like a snowman under the warm spring sun, the day would come when he would feel nothing but pain and despair. So let it stay behind the scenes for my son. That's the right thing to do. But that wasn't the only reason Adriana decided to leave. The main reason was something else. And Michael understood her perfectly well. "I understand," he replied. "Just go wherever you want, to your sisters. For now, to my sisters." Adriana paused for a moment, but she didn't tell him. Then she looked at Michael again. This time her husband was scrutinizing her face. He was quite guessing about this unspoken then. But this unpleasant topic he and his wife for the last 2 years, in every possible way, tried to avoid. "You'll manage without us." "Of course," Michael replied. "Don't worry, everything will be fine." "Yeah," a little audibly, the wife said. "We'll be fine. We have a life to live, Michael. School in the fall. I got a new job. There's a lot to do over the summer." Michael didn't say anything. He struggled to get up from the couch, ruffled the clumpy hair on his head with his hands. He went into the kitchen for a smoke. "And you know it." Adriana threw him a curveball. "That your toothbrush is missing." That Michael looked around. "Do you brush your teeth?" "I haven't brushed in 2 days." "You didn't throw it away." "I didn't throw it away." "Why would I throw it away?" "That's another oddity," Adriana concluded thoughtfully. Maybe Ethan took it somewhere. The gas man was here yesterday, said the wife. He was checking the extractors, and then he came in to wash the bathroom. That's when your brush disappeared. You've got a persecution complex. Why would we give up on anyone? I wish I knew, Adriana said. But this car is black, and the gas man doesn't look like a gas man at all. It's strange. By the way, it's the first time the car left so early. Aha, Michael called back from the kitchen. He opened the window a little and lit a cigarette. He hadn't smoked since this morning, and the first puff made his head buzz pleasantly. For a second, the anxious anticipation was replaced by an indifferent exhaustion. As he sat like that in the hallway, the door slammed. Either Ethan had returned from the section, or Adriana had decided to go out. Michael stood at the window and watched. A minute later, his wife came out of the entryway. She was carrying 2 bags, one huge and the other a little smaller, when she'd had time to pack them. Did she decide to leave right now? Apparently, yes. Didn't even think it was worth it to give him a chance to say goodbye to his son. I picked him up right from practice. Ethan's a big boy, though. He can visit his father if he wants to. His sister lives just 2 blocks from their 5-story building. But does he even know what's going on? Summer can be so dragged into its vortex that the child will lose track of time. And at his sister's, they will not stay long. And then he'll go to the village to the house. William, that's what will happen. And in September, Michael won't want Ethan to see him. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to. His heart clenched in his chest at the thought. Michael lit another cigarette and waited until a Chevrolet turned clumsily around the corner. That was it. No more thinking about it. As it will be, so it will be. All the best things in his and Adriana's lives were long gone. There's no getting it back. Even if tomorrow he miraculously turned out to be perfectly healthy, their breakup would still be inevitable. That had become clear that night when, standing with the gun in his hand beside Adriana's bed, he had struggled to pull the trigger. Through his tears, all he could see was a vague outline. Her tanned body. Frozen in William's arms, he knew his wife had been seeing his friend for over a year, but he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He made up a non-existent business trip, and at 4 a.m., after checking that his son wasn't home visiting, probably at his sister's, quietly walked into his bedroom and saw. When the veil of tears fell from his eyes, he realized that Adriana was silently looking at him on her face. Not a single muscle trembled. Michael did not notice the fear in her wide-open eyes. Was she really so sure he wouldn't shoot? Or was she resigned to her fate? They stared at each other for half a minute, and that's when Michael did. It was clear that their past was forever hidden behind the horizon, and there was no going back to it. That time he turned around, left the house and flew to Sochi for a whole week, where he drank and dragged around with some girls' names, which now could not remember. 3 months after that incident and sounded this terrible diagnosis, and everything fell into place by itself. Memories overwhelmed Michael so much that he did not notice how the night came. It was an unusual night, warm, with a huge bright moon staring right through his window. He lay on the couch, still in his clothes and still thinking about the past, and the memory carried him farther and farther away. That strange moon was keeping him awake. It was trying to draw out something important, maybe even the most important thing in his life, after which everything went wrong. Intuitively, Michael already guessed what this idyllic moon was humming, but it was as if he resisted. He didn't want to relive it all over again. After all, what did it matter now? It's not that moon, it's not that night. It's just an illusion that solves nothing. Michael stood up, walked to the kitchen, took the last cigarette out of the pack and lit it. His nose crinkled, and he felt a warm trickle of blood run down his lips and drop 3 drops to the floor. Hal swore. He clamped his fingers over his nose and took a quick step toward the bathroom. After stopping the bleeding, he took 2 pills and decided that it would be better to go for a walk now instead of sitting at home, especially since he was out of cigarettes. He should stop at a convenience store and buy a couple packs. He took the money out of his wallet and put on his shoes, but after thinking for a while, he went back into the room. He raked through the chaotically piled things in the closet and found in the farthest corner the wooden box in which his gun was hidden. The urge was spontaneous. He didn't think it over in any particular way. He took the gun out, slipped it into his pants pocket, and only then went out to the landing to check if he had forgotten his keys. Then the thought flashed through his mind that he might not need the keys now. Michael smiled wickedly at the thought and closed the door confidently. It was quiet outside. On a bench near the entrance sat a cat nervously wagging its tail and looking somewhere in the bushes. Where did he hear a low murmur? It's not the season for grasshoppers yet. This warmth was deceptive. Too early. And probably, very soon, the weather would disappoint those who believed in the summer with frost and snow. It had happened before. Michael shivered, adjusted his gun in his pocket, and headed along the sidewalk toward the convenience store. He bought cigarettes and smoked at the bus stop. He hailed a cab. An irresistible desire pulled him to the place that had become so significant in his destiny. And in William's, too, probably. Though Michael had never admitted it to himself before. The silver Suzuki pulled up 5 minutes later. "You know, the prayer stone?" Michael asked the driver. He looked at him in surprise, nodded silently, and pressed the gas pedal. I wonder what he thought of me. Michael's mind raced. It took them 20 minutes to reach the specified place on an empty highway. Michael paid. He looked at the cab and walked down the slope to the river. He adjusted his eyes to the darkness that enveloped him. The prayer stone, as it had been for 1,000 years before, lay in place, a huge one, 3 meters high and at least 6 meters wide. No one knew why it was called a prayer stone. There were no intelligible fables on the subject. But for their company of 3, it had always been an iconic place. One could say that in their case, the stone justified its name. Everyone there wanted it or not, asked the higher powers for something of their own. And so it was with Michael. He climbed to the flat top of the stone, sat down, feeling the warmth instantly transferred to every cell of his body. The moon continued to shine. His eyes grew accustomed to its golden, almost magical light. Michael stroked the rough surface with his hand. "Hello, hello, hello," he whispered back. There was a slow trickle in the river that hugged a boulder near the shore. There was a muffled splash. Maybe a big fish or an andatra that had failed, like Michael, to sleep? He smiled. Then his eyes caught the name Betty carved in the stone. His heart shuddered. It was about her, the same Betty whose image had fluttered so persistently in his mind that night and from which he had tried to ward off. But it was not he who had written it. Definitely not him. Was it William? Years ago, when Michael was barely 13 and when William was still the same, completely different, they were friends with a girl named Betty. She lived in the neighbor's yard and was not much like all the other girls. And she was only a year younger than them. She was what you might call a girl's girl. Michael and William didn't really notice that she was a girl, despite her skirt. Long hair mostly braided in a thick braid. She was the soul of their company, their motor, without which life seemed less interesting. Her head was always full of ideas. She loved and knew how to tell creepy stories, the real background of which they invariably tried to find, exploring those places where the legends, told by the legends, took place. Betty, creepy. Nights spent in a bloody ravine or in an abandoned cemetery, the casemates of a dilapidated noble manor, where no sane child dared to poke around in the dark. In a strange way, their parents were cool about such sleepovers. The 3 of them even formed a sort of secret circle called the Hearts of the 3. The other kids at school, who had heard about their adventures and hikes, sometimes expressed a desire to be a part of their community, but were always turned down. Michael didn't mind expanding the circle a bit, but Betty remained adamant until the very end, until the day she suddenly disappeared from town. But that was later, when Michael turned 15. Before that, nothing had broken their idyll of their bond forever. As they had once vowed, sitting on this very prayer stone by the Targhee River under the same moon that was now rising over the city. And stirred Michael's memory that night, they did not investigate anything. Betty, all the day before, had been behaving rather strangely. She was unlike herself, as if the motor had suddenly been taken out of her, and her whole being filled with honey and wildflowers. Then before the night vows, Michael's first serious thought was that Betty was a girl. A sudden thought, though seemingly so obvious. He stared at Vetta's face, at her plump lips, at her greenish-gray eyes, just a little slanted and as if accentuated by mist. Shy of his curiosity, Michael looked at her figure with a quick glance and realized that he could not tear himself away from her. How had he not noticed all this before? It was amazing. A light haze floated over Tarka, and a bird of prey cried out in the woods somewhere in the distance. Huge and like a glowing egg yolk, the warm stone on which they sat seemed hot. From the impossible desires of thought, danced in Michael's head. Betty, apparently noticing this special attention from him, smiled fleetingly with half of her beautiful lips, shot her eyes open, looked a little sidelong, and said, "Let's go swimming." "It's cold," William answered her. Michael looked at him in surprise. Is he crazy? How could it be cold when the stone is so hot? But William was indeed shaking slightly with chills. He sat with his arms tightly around his knees and tried to hold back his shivering. "Are you sick?" Michael asked. "I don't know," William mumbled and turned away, staring at the blackness of the forest. On the other side of the Targhee, it was only then that Michael realized that his friend that evening had also noticed Betty's sudden transformation. Only his reaction was apparently the opposite. If Michael was attracted to Betty and was filled with heat, William tried to push his thoughts away, protesting against such a change and not wanting to let something truly strange and capable of destroying their union penetrate the hearts of the three of them. He felt it instinctively and was frightened. "You're weird today," Betty said, and looked down at the boys as if she understood the reasons for their weirdness. And adjusting the situation as she saw fit, she deftly climbed down from the rock, stripped off all her clothes, and slowly waded into the water, sinking into the rippling mist. Michael and William sat with their mouths open. They had clearly not expected such a thing from their friend, seeing the confusion and curiosity with which her friends regarded her. The girl was having fun. She was once again like the Betty she had always been before. Her ringing laughter echoed slowly through the deserted neighborhood. She twirled around in the water, splashing it with her hands, so that the drops reached the petrified faces of the two boys mesmerized by her dance. Yes, it was the same Betty, only with one small but unmentionable detail. She was wearing no clothes for the first time in their friendship. That night was the last night of their sincere relationship. It wasn't that things had changed outwardly. No, everything had changed on the inside. So to an outsider, it would probably be unnoticeable. Michael and William never once discussed that night's bathing scene, never even hinted that it had happened to them. But Michael replayed the image of the nymph-turned-Betty every night and realized more and more each night that he had fallen in love with his friend inevitably and foolishly. He was sure the same thing was happening to William. By inertia, they continued for another year to organize joint trips to the mysterious places of suburban abandonment. But there was no excitement, no interest in these adventures. But there was tension, at any second ready to turn into a storm. Only Betty could delay that storm. She read her friends' feelings like an open book, and manipulated them with a deftness that only she could enjoy. And William and Michael knew she understood, but there was nothing they could do. There was nothing they could do to counteract her girlish charms. And in the end, everything ended in the most banal way. Michael was unpleasant to remember it. On one of the camping trips, it was just the two of them. William had been ill that time, and they had not been joined by the woods, the campfire, the tent. Short conversations about almost nothing. And Michael felt like a traitor, a destroyer of their eternal union, their idyllic circle. And it made it all the more painful to see that Betty, on the contrary, was happy with this outcome. William, too, understood it all. And for 2 whole months, their company broke up. They didn't call each other, and when they went out, they made sure they didn't accidentally run into each other. By the end of their last summer, William was the first to reconcile. He went to Michael's house, made the most casual conversation, as if there had never been any separation before, and then they went to Betty's house together. But Betty wasn't home. She and her mother had moved to another town 200 kilometers away. It made a heavy impression on the friends. They didn't expect such a turnaround. In their hearts, they hoped to somehow revive their former relationship with Betty. In their minds, she had been cruel. She hadn't spoken a word to them before she left. How could she? Had she forgotten how good they'd all been together? That can't be true. You don't forget. Another year passed. Michael and William continued to be friends, but it was no longer a friendship. William had other company that Michael wasn't interested in at all. He was alone, and emptiness began to fill his soul. Cold, dragging, vile. Every time he came home from school, he looked in the mailbox, still hoping that sooner or later Betty would send word of himself. But the box was always empty. Michael often dreamed that he opened the mail and a pile of letters from Betty poured in. The same dream for hundreds of nights. Once the new summer came, he couldn't take it anymore. By any means necessary, he found out his girlfriend's new address, got on his bike, and set off on a long journey. Whether he wanted to impress Betty with this feat or to try to forgive himself for betraying the purity of their purely friendly relationship, he drove 200 kilometers in 10 hours, driving like a madman, almost without stopping to rest. When he arrived in the evening, he found out that Betty lived 20 kilometers away from the city in the dormitory of a trade school. He reached the right place only by 10 p.m., not without difficulty. After sneaking into the dorm, he knocked on room number 25. Betty opened the door, and Michael's heart sank into his heels. God, how beautiful was she! In the last almost 2 years that they hadn't seen each other, the girl had changed, of course, but only for the better. She was taller, thinner in the hips, but still as slender and with an even tan on her face and arms. Only the haircut was different. There was no long hair. Short, slightly etched white strands of hair made her even more daring. Rosy eyes looked with defiance, and even a little bit with contempt. You only asked her the first second she recognized Michael. I answered and handed her a bunch of wildflowers I'd picked on the way. She came out into the corridor in a white robe with black spots and closed the door behind her. "What are you doing here?" she said, carelessly intercepting the bouquet held out to her. "Hello," Michael said, bewildered. "I came to see how you stink." Betty wrinkled her nose. "Did you run?" "Ran on my bike, Betty laughed. "Who's there?" A woman's voice came from behind the door. "Betty, let's be late." "Is Gray in there?" Betty closed the door tighter, not answering. They were silent for half a minute. Michael didn't know what else to say to him. All the words he had prepared in advance had slipped out of his head. Betty's reaction struck him as cold. He had almost accomplished a feat. 200 kilometers rushed like a madman just to see her. The girl continued to wrinkle slightly, but not from the smell of Michael's wet sweat, but from the discomfort of the whole situation. "So what did you want? You were just going for it." "Yeah. Where were you before that? You disappeared suddenly. You didn't say anything. William and I didn't know what to think. It's been a long time. How's he doing?" "I don't know. We're in different companies now." "Have you contacted him?" "No. Look, I'm sorry. I'm happy to see you and all. But it's kind of awkward for me to have a conversation right now. My friend and I are in a hurry. You should come back some other time, okay?" Okay. Michael exhaled doomingly, realizing that they wouldn't be able to have any conversation. "Bye," he added, turning around and walking away without looking back. Maybe he should have insisted then. Some way to stop Betty, to convince her that she could be happy with him. After all, they had been happy once. But Betty knew how to convince with just her looks. She always had. And this time, Michael didn't dare stay. He couldn't find the arguments for a heart-to-heart talk. There was too much difference between what he wanted to hear when he met her and what he actually heard. Betty had changed. Outwardly, she remained irresistible, but her inner adulthood didn't suit her at all. Alienating, as if from another planet. Interesting, Michael thought. William had already met her in this new reality of hers. He looked again at the name carved in the stone and repeated the outline of the letters, tracing them with his finger. William had written it, hadn't he? So he remembered Betty. And after he'd almost stopped talking to Michael, he might have found her before he did. But what difference does it make now? Now William and his Adriana. That's supposed to be Michael's only concern right now. But look at him, sitting here in the middle of the night. And it's not Adriana who's jealous of him, it's Betty. And what kind of move is this on William's part? revenge, or did he really love Adriana that much? Their tastes have always been similar, after all. Somewhere in the periphery of his mind, he kept thinking that Ethan might not be his son, but William's child. But Michael kept that thought out of his heart. Even if it were, it wouldn't change anything. He loves Ethan and will always love Ethan, or rather, as he always will until September. Maybe, if he's lucky, even into November, or... Why did he bring a gun with him? Is love really going to end right now? Right here on this rock in the sad moonlight? What's the point of stalling? What would he get out of these few months, most of which he'd be bedridden, writhing in pain? Better to end it all right here, where his life had taken the steepest turn to circle back to this very same place on the same night, only lonely, swallowing him whole with all the husks of the past, present, and future. Michael drew his gun, took the safety off, twirled it in his hand, admiring the glare of the moon playing on its shabby sides. Then he put it to his temple and squeezed his eyes shut, and at that moment the phone rang. Michael jerked, pulled the trigger, realizing that the muzzle had slipped off his temple and the shot would now have to go past his head. But the trigger clicked loudly, and the shot never rang out. What the hell? Michael pulled out the clip, looked. It was empty. Had Adriana found his hiding place and thoughtfully removed the ammunition from the clip? Of course she did. She's seen him before. Him pointing a gun at her head once. She was afraid for herself and for her son. How could she even continue to live in the same apartment with him after that incident? He must have looked crazy in her eyes. Yet she lived, hoping for something, feeling sorry for him, feeling guilty. Michael did not find an answer to that question. The phone continued to play a cheerful tune that was inappropriate at this moment. Michael angrily tossed the gun into the river, pulled out his cell phone and looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. He wanted to press cancel, but his finger traitorously missed the green answer button. All right, he'd hear what someone needed from him in the middle of the night. Yes, he said loudly. Michael heard a painfully familiar voice. He recognized it immediately. It was Betty. Betty recognized it. She grinned slightly. Hi. Hi. Michael's voice trembled. He couldn't believe this call was real. How could there be such coincidences? Maybe he fired a shot and didn't realize he'd turned into a ghost. And now he's seeing things. He even looked around, thinking he'd find his breathless physical body, like in the movies. But there was no body, nothing around him had changed. Nothing had shuttered, no tragedy that had not happened only thanks to Adriana. No impossible this minute call from Betty. The fog thickened even more densely over the slow stream. Targi, the edge of the moon, hid behind a small cloud in the river, again splashed something large. Just where Michael had thrown the gun that had failed. Are you there, Michael? Hello. Yes, I'm here. Go ahead. I'm sorry I'm late. How are you? I heard you got married and have a son. Yes, but it's not as rosy as it may seem. How are you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while. I guess you didn't want to. But I understand. Last time we had a conversation, it didn't work out. My business sucks, Michael. That's actually why I'm calling. Is there anything I can do to help? You're the only one who can. That's how, and what's wrong? Michael heard Betty cry softly. He realized the inappropriateness of her complaints now. He couldn't take in more than he had already taken in, especially for today. He was terminally ill. His wife had left him, taking his son with her. And not only had she left him, but she had abandoned him treacherously, without the least bit of regret. And she went to William for a reason. What made it doubly bad? After all, a minute ago he was trying to kill himself. Did he have a shred of sympathy for anyone? And realizing all this wildness, Michael wondered if Betty was willing to listen to him now. It was only 5 years ago that Betty continued. I got married too. I thought it was a good thing. My husband already had his own business. Then he got even bigger. I was kind of in the clouds, madly in love. But listen, it would have been better if we could have met instead of on the phone. It's a long story, and it's hard for me to find the right words. If I see you, it'll be easier if you're there for me. Michael, we can meet. Michael hesitated for a second. Right now, he asked. How is that possible? I'm already in town, said Betty. Where are you? You won't believe this, but I'm sitting on a prayer stone. What? Betty was genuinely surprised. You're not kidding? Believe me, I'm not joking right now. I'm here if you want to meet me tomorrow. Do you have a place to stay? No, I don't. You're all I have in town right now. And William? Michael's heart sank in his chest at the question that came out of his own mouth. William? Betty asked, genuinely trying to figure out who Michael was talking about. Oh yes, William. No, I've forgotten what your friend's name is. I haven't talked to him in 100 years, and I don't have his phone number. Michael, are you still jealous of him? Oh my God, stop it. You're the only one who can help me right now, and no one else. Then I'm waiting for you. The stone is as hot as it was the night you were here. Yeah, I remember, Betty interrupted him. I'll drive right up there. I'll drive my car over. Michael turned off the phone. Michael turned the phone off, still doubting the reality of what was happening. It was only when his nose bled again that he finally realized himself. No, this is real. Ghosts don't get leukemia. He climbed down from the rock and cautiously approached the water to wash himself. The cloud that had covered the moon for a moment dissipated. The light was bright enough again to make the whole neighborhood visible. Michael stooped to scoop up the water in the palm of his hand and saw quite close to the shore in the shallow water his gun, which he thought he had tossed considerably farther away, but the weapon lay quite close by, so it was possible to reach it. Michael washed his face, took off his sneakers, rolled up his pants, and stepped into the warm water. He searched the sandbank with his hand and took out the gun. He felt calmer with it. He did not know how the upcoming meeting would end, and he would not survive another portion of pain. They were in the same bed by dawn. As soon as Betty arrived at Michael's prayer stone, it was clear that this was what was going to happen. No matter how bad he felt, the attraction to his favorite girl from his happy past was stronger than anything he had experienced recently. And Betty seemed different this time, without the ostentatious coldness she'd shown the last time they'd met. No fake adulthood, no arrogance. At the prayer stone, it was as if they were back in their youth, illuminated by the same moon and shrouded in mist. Michael never said a word about his illness. Betty told him everything. He had changed a lot 4 years ago, she said of her husband, Liam. It was like he'd been switched. There'd been some kind of competition. For a whole month, Liam wasn't even home. He didn't even call. I couldn't find a place to be. Nervous, trying to find out what was going on from someone. But everyone was silent. My daughter was 6 at the time. She felt the tension too, because she was as worried as I was. You have a daughter? Michael woke up. Yeah, Kathy. Wait, if she was 6 4 years ago, she must be 10 now. Yes? And you're 25. Betty went quiet, didn't say anything. You had her at 15. It's a long story. Michael. Betty spoke softly. It just happened. So Michael began, but Betty interrupted him. Yes, yes. The last time you came to visit me at the technical school. Kathy was 2 years old, and my parents took care of her while I was studying. Then I married Liam and took my daughter. Who's the father? Doesn't matter. I don't think he even knew she existed. The doctor said if I had an abortion, I wouldn't be able to have a baby. I'm sorry. Michael kissed her on the forehead. And I was a fool coming over with flowers like a little boy, not even knowing about it. Oh, come on. How could you have known? I had to play the indifferent bitch. I didn't want to burden you with my new single mom status. You did seem like the perfect kid to me. Betty grinned. You wanted to impress me by biking 200 kilometers. For a date, and I did stink. Really? Betty laughed even louder, hugged Michael tightly, and they merged in a long and passionate kiss. The bedroom in which Michael had already prepared to die slowly in cold loneliness. It didn't seem so empty that morning. The dawn rays were shining through the tightly curtained window. Shadows flickered across the room, stirring somewhere nearby. The wall clock ticked steadily. A neighbor 2 floors up had turned on the radio, which was playing beautiful music that sounded very familiar. And then what happened? Michael asked as their next burst of tenderness subsided. Then Betty lay on her back and stared wistfully at the ceiling. Then the worst times began. When I told you that Liam had changed, it wasn't a figure of speech. I really didn't recognize him. He became rude, cruel. He was always abusing me and my daughter. It was as if he wanted to get rid of our presence in his house. I began to think about divorce, but the day I hinted at it, he beat me badly. Michael pulled himself up sharply in bed. Beaten? Yeah, that was the first time. And then it started happening almost every month. It was like he enjoyed it, turned into a monster. It was scary to look at him. Kathy he soon sent to his parents' house. She, thank God, did not see the whole nightmare, but she made me afraid. I didn't know what was going through Liam's mind. I didn't understand his motives or his goals. Who and what he wanted to prove. What made him behave like that with me? In the third year of living like this, I was already thinking of killing myself. What about your parents? Didn't they realize what was happening to you? Dad had died by then, and Mom had withdrawn after his death. For a while, Liam, Kathy, and I visited her every 3 months. But soon I realized that it was becoming too much for Mom. She didn't want to see anyone, not me, not my granddaughter, not even Liam, whom she had always disliked before. It was horrible. Michael could only squeeze out of himself. It's awful. Michael, you have no idea. I opened my wrists once. Betty stretched out her forearm in front of Michael, which was covered with 4 scars, which Michael, blinded by a love strike, had not noticed before. I did it in the bathroom. I sat there for a long time, waiting to faint, but consciousness wasn't going to leave me. But Liam found me before I passed out. And you know what he did? He brought a chair and sat silently opposite me, as if in a theater, smiling and watching the life slowly leaving me. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently, at the very last moment, he decided that I should live. When I got home, I didn't think about death anymore. At first, I wanted to kill him. That would have solved the problem. What do you think? Betty stood up and looked at Michael carefully. Her eyes glittered with a mixture of anger and defiance. There was something in that look that Michael had noticed that night on Targhee, when Betty had thrown off her clothes and gone into the water. Perhaps, Michael said doubtfully in his head. Betty nodded and collapsed back onto the pillow. You hesitated? I doubted it then. Killing a man is worse than being killed, and it's as vile as slitting your wrists. Do you know how disgusting that is? I do. I haven't though. I have. It's not painful. It's not scary. It's just gross, like you're betraying the most important thing. That's what this whole world is about. It's like spitting in God's soul. Anyway, I changed my plans and decided to just run away. I spent a whole year preparing for it. I pretended to be a sheep, looking for any clue to escape not empty-handed, but at least with some means of subsistence. After all, Liam has connections in the highest levels of government, has people in the police, in the prosecutor's office, in the hotel business, in airports and train stations. It wouldn't be hard to find me if I made a mistake. I managed to find a loophole. I'd saved up enough cash, and I actually had a car. Liam gave it to me for my birthday. Surprised the hell out of me. That's when I decided I was a fool. I thought I was smarter than that monster, but it wasn't to be. He knew all my preparations. He knew my every move. His men stopped me at the first turn out of our manor at night. What indescribable pleasure did that give him? He didn't even beat me this time. The mere fact that he had so easily broken all my plans was enough for him. Betty was silent again. Michael saw the tears flow silently down her cheeks, not changing a single feature of her beautiful face in this morning's semi-darkness. And how did you manage to escape in the end? Apparently, he thought he'd broken me. It was like he wasn't interested in me anymore. I noticed his men weren't watching me so closely anymore. I was even allowed to go about my business in the city without a guard. It was a strange feeling. I should have breathed a sigh of relief. But just then, my fear became even more intense. I felt like Liam wanted to kill me. I don't know, maybe cause an accident or something. I bought a disposable cell phone. I got your number and I called, or rather, I came here first, and then I made the call. That's it. I didn't get off the ground with much to show for it, to be honest. You did the right thing, said Michael, excited by her story. I don't have the same opportunities as your husband, but I think I can help you. At least he won't be able to find you for a few months. But he's bound to find this place soon. I'm sure there's some kind of sensor in the car they'll give him the location. There's a reason for that. I put it on the block. I got a spot from here, Michael said. Were he sure he can't find us? Betty wondered. Michael repeated confidently. What did you think? I'll leave you alone. Let's start packing right now. Get up. I have an old house. Left by my late grandfather in an almost abandoned village. It doesn't even have cell phone reception, but it's a good place to spend the summer. I'll also take money out of my account. I've been saving up, but it doesn't matter. The main thing is to have enough money for the first time, and then we'll figure it out as we go along. Michael exclaimed enthusiastically to Betty, "You don't know how grateful I am. Let's go." Michael was reborn. He even forgot for a moment that this was his last summer. For the first time in months, he wasn't making plans for himself, he was making plans for Betty. But it still inspired him, gave his life a kind of importance. Some meaning almost like a mission entrusted to him by the powers above. It wasn't until close to lunch the next day, when they finally made it home, that he realized his nose hadn't been bleeding since morning. He did not feel a full-body ache or headache. It seemed to him that under these new circumstances, even the illness was bound to recede. He had never been so sure of himself in his life. At the bank, he withdrew all his savings of $114,000. He took with him from home a whole bag of the most necessary things: clothes, bedding, tools, disposable dishes, medicines. Even managed to find some ammo. They drove Betty's car farther away. They had breakfast in a quiet, almost deserted cafe and took the cab to the village. The house, to Michael's surprise, was not as dilapidated as he had imagined. The panes in the windows were intact. There was water in the well. The roof, at first glance, didn't seem to be in any trouble either. It took 3 hours to clean up. Everything in the house was untouched. Table, chairs, bed, kerosene 2-burner stove. There were even earthenware dishes, spoons, forks, and mugs in the chest of drawers. On the wall hung an old tear-off calendar. It was frozen at the date February 14, 2002. In general, it was possible to live without special difficulties. Toward evening, though, the strength did begin to leave Michael, and his nose bled again. Betty didn't see it coming, and Michael managed to avoid premature explanations about his health. They went to bed at the first hour of the night and passed out as soon as their bodies were horizontal. And then there were 4 happy days in Michael's life, even though his faith in a miraculous deliverance from his illness quickly melted away, rubbing his nose in the irresistible reality. He began to feel the happiness that had descended upon him particularly keenly. It was as if God were fulfilling his last wish before his death. He had never thought about it. But if God had asked Michael what he wanted for his last wish, he would have thought of a date with Betty. This girl was not just his first love, not just an unrealized dream. In her coincided all the best that he had or could have had in a more fortunate arrangement: a real sense of purpose, a happy family, a sincere relationship, and an unbreakable link between his past, present, and future. Only with her could he find wholeness, put himself back together from the scattered bits and pieces of fate. Only she could give every day to every beat of his heart the significance of purposeful momentum and the incredible poignancy of feeling. But now he couldn't afford to simply savor these moments. Though perhaps that would be the right thing to do, because the summer would end, his last strength would run out, and he would have to tell Betty his main secret about the final verdict and leave her alone with his unresolved problem. If Betty were in his place, that's exactly what she would do. And Michael understood that, though it made no difference to him. He's not Betty, he's made of a different matter. He can only do what he has conceived. He had time to think his way out of the situation. As a matter of fact, the thought had flashed into his mind the moment Betty had asked him if he thought killing Liam would solve her problem. Then he'd answered maybe, though he realized at that very second that it was the only way out. What's stopping him from doing it? Still, one way or another, Michael's fate is sealed. He can die giving false hope to the girl he loves, or he can at least try to end his life with meaning. Just one bullet separates Betty from freedom from this monster, and him from a meaningful end. And there was only one thing that saddened Michael. In the memory of his son Ethan, he would forever be a murderer. Neither Adriana nor anyone else would be able to tell him the truth, if only because they'd never know it themselves. Maybe if everything had ended the way Michael had envisioned 5 days ago, it would have been the right thing for Ethan. But there's a reason life has created him to end up like this. Such a daunting task cannot be hesitated. The choice is clear: meaningful or meaningless action or shameful flight. Otherwise, if things are as Betty has told him, she has no chance of survival. And if Michael did not make up his mind now, he would surely drag her with him to the grave. If she had chosen at the last moment not him, but some other path, but that had already happened. The choice had fallen to him, and Michael had taken it upon himself to justify it. And now Betty's fate was in his hands alone. The weather continued to be truly summer-like: clear days, warm nights, birds chirping. The rustling of fresh leaves all around seemed to tease, showing exactly what Michael was fighting for now. This to make it last in Betty's life. 2. To pull her into this whirlpool, to dissolve her in it, and to saturate her with true happiness. Without pain, without fear, without despair, without endless running away from the ominous shadows. On the morning of the 5th day, feeling that he had very little strength left, Michael told Betty that he had to depart on some important business. Betty, no matter how hard Michael tried to hide his worries, could feel the tension building in him every day. But never once did she try to emphasize it in conversation. "Where are you going?" she asked. "For a long time I will be scared without you." "It's my son's birthday today," Michael replied. And it was true. He wanted to see Ethan one last time to congratulate him, to say a few kind words. Then he wanted to get down to business. From his conversations with Betty, which always revolved around her nightmarish past, Michael already had a good idea of where Liam's house was located, knew which floor and which wing his room was on, where he most often rested in the evening. Betty had been sprinkling in such details at random. Michael pieced them together into a coherent picture and mentally drew routes and patterns of approach. He could get to the estate in 3 hours, and then he could figure out how to proceed. But first, it was necessary to see Ethan. But be careful in town. Liam's men are probably looking for him in every nook and cranny. "I understand," Michael reassured Betty. "Everything will be all right. Don't worry. When will you be back?" "I should be back by tonight," he lied. Michael never expected to see Betty again. When he got to town, he bought the graphics tablet Ethan had dreamed of at the store. In addition to soccer, his son enjoyed the drawing class, and he liked drawing even more than playing soccer. For himself, he bought binoculars with good magnification. Such a device would be useful for a preliminary inspection of the estate. Michael was sure that Adriana and her son had already moved into William's house, and so they had. He found Ethan in the 2-story cottage William had purchased 3 years ago. The boy was playing ball with the other kids. He was genuinely happy to see his father. The sudden departure from home had discouraged him. The vague explanations of his mother and her sister never made clear to him the necessity of the move. Every day he asked when his father would join them. But no one had ever explained anything to him about moving into the house William, whom he knew well, but did not consider particularly close to him, was not at all out of the loop. Daddy asked William, "When are you going to take me home?" "Don't you like it here?" "I'm fine. I just don't understand why we are here and why you don't live with us now." "I have important and urgent things to do, son. For the whole summer. In September, I'll already be free for that long. It can't be helped. It just happened." "Did you have a fight with your mom?" "Just a little bit, kid. But that's not the point, believe me." They talked for about 20 minutes. Michael handed over his present, but politely declined the offer to come inside and say hello to his mom. Ethan was upset again, but the joy of having a tablet now outweighed the resentment that flared up. "Listen," Michael said, "if you ever hear anything bad about me, don't believe everything they tell you. I'm not a perfect person. There's no such thing as perfect. But I'm not evil. Remember that I've never wished evil on anyone." "Why do you say that?" Ethan became uneasy. "Why would I say something bad about you? Did you do something bad? No, that's why you can't believe it. I've always tried to do the right thing. Sometimes the right thing may not look exactly the way we're used to seeing it. I'm sorry if I'm not making myself clear. It's not very clear. I just want you to remember me as someone who loves you. I understand, Dad, Ethan said. I know you're a good man. I'm sorry you and Mom had a fight. But you're gonna make up. I don't know, son. I'm not gonna lie. We'll see. I hope everything works out in the end. All right, son, I gotta run to my dad's for now. Thanks for the gift. By 4:00 p.m., Michael took the cab to the estate. He got out about a kilometer away so as not to draw attention to himself early. He didn't yet have a clear enough idea of what he would do once he was near the mansion. There were probably surveillance cameras everywhere and a large security staff. According to Betty, Liam was overly concerned about his own safety, especially after he had managed to settle things with his competitors. But Michael was determined. This time he would go to the end and would not just give up, would not leave Betty alone with terrible circumstances. The exertion made my nose bleed nonstop. My head buzzed as if a transformer had been turned on. But his body was obedient and his thoughts were clear, and that was more important than the painful sensations. At last, the corner of a high brick fence with some wooden turrets on poles, like birdhouses, appeared. It was unclear whether they were decorative accesses or niches for hidden cameras. Michael turned off the path into the forest, hid behind a tree, and decided to look around. He took out his binoculars and scrutinized the birdhouses. No, it's just some kind of architectural crap. He didn't notice any foreign objects inside the boxes. After smoking, Michael climbed an old fir tree and looked at what the fence was hiding. The closest part of the area was the most deserted. They were just starting to build some kind of site for future buildings. Marked logs, concrete blocks, stacks of red bricks, and piles of sand were lying everywhere. Almost in the corner, there was a small excavator, which had managed to dig 10 meters of trench. Apparently, the work shift was over, as there was not a single person visible near the site. If you climb over the fence into the territory, this is the most convenient place. The main building of the estate was 3 stories with a front porch and neatly trimmed bushes around the perimeter. It was located in the back, about 100 meters from the corner of the fence. A wide cobblestone road led to it from the checkpoint, flanked by trees and sculptures of fantastic animals. Liam, however, was not without romance. Michael thought, maybe Betty had insisted on the sculptures. Who knows? At the construction site, there was another carriage. This is where the foremen usually sit and store their most valuable tools. The door was slightly ajar. We could look in there. Maybe we'll find something useful for further plan of action. All right, let's get started. Back in the woods, Michael found the right size, the trunk of a fallen, dried spruce tree. It was thick enough to rest his feet on its limbs, but not too heavy to drag it to the fence and rest one end against the wall, improvising some kind of ladder, not without difficulty. But Michael still managed to reach the top edge of the fence. He pulled himself up, threw his leg over, and climbed over. Although the disease had reduced his former strength, Michael had lost a lot of weight. In the last 6 months, he had become leaner and more mobile in his joints, but his stamina had completely disappeared. He could only exert himself for 5 minutes, and then he would fall to pieces. Once he even lost consciousness trying to drag a 20-kilogram sack of potatoes to the 3rd floor. But he didn't need more than 5 minutes. Hiding behind stacks of bricks and piles of sand, he ran over to the carriage and went inside. There was a bottle of mineral water and a first aid kit. Michael took 3 scheduled pills, at once wiped the blood from his chin, and sat with his head tilted back for about 10 minutes. The bleeding stopped. The shirt on his chest was sticking unpleasantly to his body. A lot of blood had drained out, apparently, but it didn't matter. He was close to his goal. He should have enough strength for the final stage of the plan. 100 meters to the mansion. But how do we get inside? He can't climb the wall to the 2nd floor, of course. There's only one entrance, but who will open it for him? Michael again took binoculars in his hands, and through the small window of the carriages looked into the front porch. There was movement. Some men in orange helmets and uniforms were dragging something inside. Some kind of drywall or rectangular panels that looked like it. He counted 5 workers. The building was being renovated too. Whatever it was, it seemed like the only way to get to the floors. There were uniforms and helmets in the trailer, just like the movers. He felt that he was bound to find something useful here. Michael threw off his backpack, changed his clothes, and went outside. There was no way out, no other options, behind a cone-shaped tree. There was a truck lurking on the cobblestone road, from which the workers were removing the white paper-wrapped panel. Michael joined them silently. No one seemed suspicious. Grabbing the heavy sheet, he headed for the open front door of the mansion. Adrenaline rushed through his body in a hot wave. Michael felt as if he were looking at himself from the outside and could not believe that all this was happening to him. It was a strange sensation, and the situation was more than surprising. Could it be so easy that he was able to get into the house of a man who was concerned about his safety? Where are all the guards? Why doesn't anyone ask him any questions? Why aren't they stopping him and wrapping their hands behind his back? Lucky coincidence. Luck. To hell with it. What difference does it make? He's right there. The panels were stacked in the far corner of the first floor. Having got rid of the load, Michael took a moment and turned to the stairs leading to the second floor. Having reached the desired floor, moved to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4. There it was, the 5th room in the left wing, overlooking the courtyard, Liam's lair. This was his destination. Michael had never met a single person on his way into this building. What's going on here? Is this even the right manner? Maybe there's been some kind of monstrous mistake. No, it can't be. Breathing heavily, Michael froze in front of the front door. He got rid of his helmet and quietly, putting it on the floor, took a pistol out of his pocket. He took the safety off. He took a deep breath, took hold of the door handle, and tried to push it open. The door was unlocked. He stepped into the room and scrambled to his feet. He was immediately enveloped in warmth. A soft beige-colored rug, racks of books, a curtained window in the far corner crackled with blazing wood. The very real fireplace. A man sat in a chair with his back turned toward the guest. Only his hand with a smoking cigarette was visible. Michael pointed the gun in his thin fingers and was about to say something when the voice of the man with the cigarette. He was interrupted by Michael. In a muffled bass, he said, "Come in, I've been waiting for you." The man got up from his chair and turned to face him. He was a man in his 40s, thin, with a graying beard and the same neatly folded hair. He wore tightly fitting black pants and a light knit sweater. A small wireless earpiece was attached to his right ear. He looked at Michael with slight irony and curiosity. "Weapons are of no use here," he spoke again. "The cartridges in it are blanks anyway." What was Michael's surprise? He could not have expected such a turn. "I had to be on the safe side." The man continued unperturbed. "Love can blind us and make us do the craziest things. While you were on the river reminiscing about your past, my men switched ammunition in the storeroom. Relax. Consider your plan almost a success. You're standing right here in front of me, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. My name is Liam." Michael's eyes went black. What the hell is going on? Is this a trap? How could Liam know that he would show up at his manor with a gun? And that's before Betty even called him. Yeah, well, to be honest, this wasn't the man he pictured. His current interlocutor looked more like an artist or a writer than a businessman. Even something Chekhovian was in his face, and in his figure Michael did not understand anything. And suddenly he remembered Adriana's words about the black car parked, in 2 days near the entrance. Why had Liam's people been following him back then? They knew Betty would end up in his possessions sooner or later. Still, the details of what was going on didn't seem to make sense. "You sit down." Liam pointed to the chair next to the fireplace. "Don't worry, I'm not going to take you hostage, let alone kill you. We just need to talk. I wanted to come and visit you myself. But as it happens, Betty made it easy. Relatively, of course." Michael sank tiredly into the chair he'd been offered and said, "Can you explain in clear words what this is all about? What did you want to talk about?" I take it this wasn't originally about Betty. It wasn't. Liam sat down too. Well, in a way, of course, it is about her. But above all, I was interested in you in your own right. You'll know why in a minute, won't you? And Betty then remembered that story about the tyrant spouse again, which it isn't. No, she didn't. She also warned me that you're good at messing with people's heads. You think I should trust you more. At that second, there was a knock on the door. Michael shuddered and automatically grabbed his gun again. "Drop it," Liam said. "Put that away, my daughter." A moment later, a girl did indeed appear in the room. It was apparently Kathy, the one Michael Betty had told Michael about. "Come in, Kathy," said Liam, smiling and standing up again. "I want you to meet this man." Michael. "Hello," said the girl quietly, scrutinizing the strange man. Michael stood up too. "Hello," he said quietly. In his orange robe, he looked like a worker lost in the corridors. But as soon as he looked at the girl, his heart raced in his chest. She was a carbon copy of Betty. Just the way Betty Michael remembered Betty from the best time of their lives. "This is a very close friend of Mommy's," Liam explained to the puzzled child. "Mommy's okay?" asked the girl when she got home. "It's okay, don't worry, Mommy will be here soon." "Okay," nodded Kathy. "I'll go then." "Go on. I'll check in with you soon in half an hour." Okay, and the girl left the room. That's what Liam said. That's what it's all about. "What do you mean?" "You wanted to know more about her real father." "I'm nothing," Michael started to say. And then it hit him. No, really? The thought had only crossed his mind once, when Betty had told him she had a 10-year-old daughter. That time Michael had asked who her father was. But Betty had so quickly and convincingly turned the conversation to another subject that the second guess had evaporated. So that fateful night, he and Betty had spent camping together, after which everything had gone wrong. Well, of course, Kathy is his daughter, Kathy. Michael started hesitantly. "Yes," Liam interrupted. "Your daughter. She knows I'm not related to her. My father even calls me Liam. She's a very impressionable and vulnerable girl. And given what's going on with her mom, Betty's not exactly healthy, psychologically speaking. I assure you, this whole story of her husband tyrannizing her, she made it up from start to finish. It started happening to her 3 years ago. You could have known she was in over her head before. You could feel it in your youth, I suppose, and I felt it fully. But she knows how to make you fall in love with her. I've never seen her equal. I only became alarmed when she began to forget her recent past at times. She stopped recognizing her loved ones. Even Kathy scared the girl. I sent her to the best clinics. Sometimes she came back to reality, but not for long. The blackouts and personality swaps became more frequent. And this latest breakdown. Unfortunately, it got out of my control. I knew Betty was up to something, but she didn't usually go this far and think her plans through so thoroughly. I was afraid that this time there might be a real tragedy. It's very complicated. Michael, and in the midst of all that complexity is Kathy. I think she's suffering more than most. Betty had been thinking more and more about her youth lately. She raved about it, talking about her friendship with William and Michael, and how one of them was to blame for everything. She never told me the name of Kathy's real father, but I began to suspect that this man was in danger. So I decided to preemptively stop Betty and find out who this person was. "Is that why my toothbrush is missing?" exclaimed Michael the toothbrush. "Oh, right, the brush, the hair from the comb. The DNA test confirmed your paternity. I suppose Betty didn't go to you to accuse me of something and try to eliminate me with your help, but for a different purpose. But from your conversations, it seemed that she had fallen back into her old legend of the monstrous husband. I wasn't surprised by the metamorphosis. You bugged the bedroom, and not just the bedroom, and not just the bug. That's how I found out about your illness and your intention to use the hidden gun. And then you just disappeared. While we were looking for your grandfather's house, you'd already left the village. I knew the only place you could have gone was to me. I knew what Betty had convinced you of, and I made sure that you could get to this room unhindered so that I could try to explain the situation to you." Liam's story sounded convincing. I had no power to do anything other than trust. Michael's will now. "Will Betty be all right?" he asked. "They're taking her home and then back to the hospital. And this time, apparently for a long time. It's hard to believe all this." Michael shook his head. "I've learned too many new and strange things today. My head is pounding. If that's the case, it's very sad, especially for Kathy," Liam said. "She's losing a little piece of her mom every year. It's like torture. I don't think they'll be able to have any human contact anytime soon. I'm sorry, Michael, for the way things have turned out. And another thing. Look, I don't want Kathy to lose her birth father. She may never have known you personally, but she's still a kid. Everything can be fixed, unfortunately," Michael said. "I don't have long left, and you know it." "Yeah, that's why I'm telling you. I've already made an appointment with a clinic in Switzerland." "Wait, listen to the end. They're ready to take you in for a bone marrow transplant. They have a donor, too. Don't worry about money, it's all paid for. If you want, we'll get back to you later. They're waiting for you the day after tomorrow. You'll live, you hear me? I want you to live." Michael tried one last time to formulate a thought, but felt unable to open his mouth. He sank into the chair, rested his head on its back, and immediately fell into total darkness. From the outside, it might have seemed strange that the millionaire suddenly got into someone else's problem and spent a lot of his time and money to help a stranger, especially one who had come to kill him. But first of all, the crime did not take place, and secondly, Liam was not such a stranger in the whole story. He had the intelligence and courage to understand the depth of Michael's pain and despair. He'd been through something like this himself, a long time ago, 18 years ago, when he stood on the edge of a precipice, saying goodbye to the world in his mind. But that's another story. Besides, Liam had made the same mistake Michael had made when he fell head over heels in love with Betty. He realized that this woman could turn any man's mind inside out. In this, he and Michael found themselves colleagues in misfortune. Despite the painful attraction, Liam had grown cold to Betty. She was just Kathy's mother, whom he loved as much as if she were his daughter. Kathy wanted to know who her real father was, and Liam had tracked that man down, not realizing at first that it would become such a knot. And it would be a shame if Kathy, having just met Michael and realized what kind of man had been in their house that memorable evening, had given up hope of continuing their fleeting acquaintance. Liam knew how to plan his life several steps ahead. He realized that even if Betty returned from the clinic, they would have no chance to build a normal relationship. He realized that he would have to look for a new life partner because he could not imagine his life without a full-fledged family. And when their own children would appear, Kathy, deprived of both mother and father, would definitely feel superfluous and not so loved in the house. This, of course, would be quite wrong. But the girl was approaching the age when the need for special attention from loved ones becomes the most acute. She had suffered enough in her childhood. Liam did not want her mental anguish to last even a day longer. Michael had to live financially. Liam required almost nothing in the way of medical treatment. Besides a large travel agency and a book publishing house, he owned a charitable foundation, not as well publicized as many like it, but providing quite a bit of help to people in desperate situations. It would be impossible to understand all the accounting subtleties of this philanthropy without specialized knowledge. But if in a word, in the end, Liam only benefited financially from this arrangement. And it is enough to realize that Liam was just a good man. There are those among the rich, although of course it looks like a paradox to most people. The operation in Switzerland was a success. Michael returned home a completely different person. He wanted to start his life over again, leaving everything that had passed forever in the past. No matter how wonderful it may seem in a moment of nostalgia and sadness. He finalized his divorce from Adriana, who was more surprised than anyone else. His rising from the dead she had enrolled Michael in. They agreed that Ethan would occasionally visit his father when he had recovered his final health and adjusted the household. In this, he was assisted by Liam. Michael's relationship with him quickly turned into a friendship. Liam offered him the position of manager at his publishing house, and Michael accepted. All the more so because it was his profile from his previous work and education. Liam, as he had foreseen, found his life partner in advance. Soon they had twins, boys, twins. Kathy, in turn, easily got along with Michael. And he himself could not enjoy her presence in his house, where she often stayed for 3 days or even a week. Friends with Ethan, despite their age difference, Betty stayed in the clinic for about 2 years. Her fate was sadder than any other. But that was all her fault. Because not everything she did with her life could be attributed to the manifestation of her illness. She herself had made the prudent decision not to return to Liam's house, even though he had filed for divorce. There was no obstacle to that. Betty didn't want to give Kathy another ride in case she had another breakdown. She needed to live alone to get stronger mentally and morally. That was the chance the doctors were giving her. It was up to her goodwill. Liam bought a house for her in the vicinity of Street Petersburg, also hoping that someday they would be able to get together. Him and Betty and Kathy and Michael and Ethan. After all, hope, as we know, is the last to die.